World War I was the largest, costliest, deadliest war in the history of mankind, and it took place near the beginning of the 20th century, the bloodiest century in human history. It took place from 1914 to 1918. It was called the Great War, simply because, as the definition of great would imply, there was no war prior that could match it. There were other names for the Great War. The war to end all wars implied that as mankind grew smarter and more sophisticated, we would clearly learn from the mistakes of the past. It was the greatest war of all time. The casualties mounted in numbers not seen since the brutal Mongol invasions of the 13th through the 16th century that ravaged through Asia and Europe. It was clearly the greatest war in terms of the number of countries involved, 160 countries on 6 continents. To ensure that it would truly be the war to end all wars after the massive loss of humanity and property, many prominent and not so prominent figures stepped forward to do their part to make sure that nothing so horrendous could ever happen again. We will look at 3 such prominent authors. The first of the 3 is H.G. Wells, the well-known science fiction author who wrote such classics as The Time Machine and War of the Worlds. What was a sci-fi guy doing trying to affect world politics? He started writing more political pieces after World War I, supporting the working class and women's voting rights, but ultimately he wrote an outline of history, and in the introduction he spoke about how mankind needed to know their past so as not to repeat it. The second author we'll talk about is Giovanni Papini, a member of the Italian educated elite, who was a self-avowed atheist. His advice was, quote, "Humans become atheists, each and all. God will nevertheless welcome you all in his heart." However, during World War I, he sought refuge after Italy entered the war, and he ended up residing in a monastery for safety. And while there, he ended up converting to Roman Catholicism. In the introduction to his book, The Life of Christ, published in 1923, and an eventual bestseller, he wrote about how the knowledge of the love of Jesus is the only way to divert from the evils of war. The last of the 3 authors is German-born Erich Paul Remarque, who eventually went by the name of Erich Maria Remarque. He changed the spelling of his name after World War I to appear French rather than German. He fought in the Western Front in the war, where he was later wounded and ended up going to the hospital where he started his writing career. But it wasn't until 1927 that he wrote his famous All Quiet on the Western Front. It wasn't published until 1929, because most publishers did not feel that readers would be interested in what he had to say. Erich Remarque wanted to make it clear to the readers what the horrors of war were clearly all about. Not long after, it was made into a very popular film, All Quiet on the Western Front.